This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, Mr. Jack Hirsch. Jack, welcome. I am so psyched for this fight, and I have to say, this is about our 91st, 92nd show that we've done.
Fights, Frank, not fights. S at the end of it.
What did I say?
You said I'm so psyched for the fight.
Did I say that? Okay. Well, that just goes into my point even more. We've been doing this show. This is about the 91st, 92nd time. And I don't remember there ever being 2 fights of this magnitude within 5 days where 3 of the best fighters in the game, 3 of the top 5 fighters in boxing, I don't think anybody would argue, you can mix them whatever you want as far as order, but Crawford, Spence, and Inoue are in the top, everybody's top 5. Fulton is considered maybe the man at 122, not some average player. He's a real guy. And Jack, we've both been following boxing. I hate to say it, but we're crowding 60 years on that. And again, I don't remember a time where there were 2 fights of this magnitude this close. Do you?
Well, we were talking a little about this before the show. The closest I could come, Frank, was June 26th, 1972, and June 27th, 1972. At June 26th at Madison Square Garden, Roberto Duran challenged Ken Buchanan for the world lightweight title. Duran was an upstart. He wasn't the legend we know now.
Right.
And Buchanan was actually favored as champion to win that fight. So it doesn't quite match up quite to the stature, let's say, Stephen Fulton and Naoya Inoue. Okay. And the next night, Muhammad Ali fought Jerry Quarry in Las Vegas in the main event. But Ali was a big favorite.
Ali was a 5-1 favorite. Exactly. Neither guy had the title. Exactly. And I just don't remember anything like this. And I'm psyched. And as I told you before the show, obviously we're going to start with Inoue and Fulton. But regarding Spence and Crawford, I have not been this keyed up and have gone back and forth on a fight like I have since Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler, April 6th, 1987. And believe it or not, Jack, I had an easier time picking the winner in that fight than I am in this fight because it's pretty much well known. I'm going to go with Crawford, but I'm not as sure as Crawford beating Spence as I was that Leonard was going to beat Hagler. But I am so jacked.
There's a big difference in the matchups in the first Leonard Hearns fight in this Crawford
Leonard Hagler
fight. Oh, you're talking about Leonard Hagler. That's
right.
The fight you were psyched up. Oh, I heard you wrong. I assumed it was Leonard Hearns, that great welterweight showdown they had.
Right, but I'm saying I had to go back to Leonard Hagler before I was at this level.
No kidding. And
that's the last time I was this high.
Okay.
Because, Jack, if you think about it, Leonard and Hagler were on a 5-year collision course, just like Spence and Crawford. Remember, in 82, Leonard had that press conference in Maryland, and he was supposed to announce maybe he was going to fight Hagler, and he retired.
Frank, Hagler was a solid favorite. It didn't have the same anticipation as far as who was going to win and lose as the first Leonard Hearns.
Publicly, fight. You're right. I'm speaking to me. I thought it was a good fight.
Sure. Okay. But just to get back to give an example, the Spence Crawford fight. Spence Crawford are 2 fighters who are probably towards the end of their prime. It doesn't mean they still can't be top of the line fighters and pound for pound claimants for 2-3 more years. It doesn't mean they won't be, but they're in their mid-30s. I mean, Spence is 33 or so. Crawford is
35.
35, getting close to 36 here. And Leonard and Hearns were entering their prime. It was the beginning of their prime. Basically.
Right. Hearns was 22 and Leonard was 25.
Crawford at the end of their prime. I mean, that's the difference involved.
But today, guys their primes do last longer because they don't fight as much.
Would it have been something if after the first Leonard Hearns fight there was a rematch clause and Hearns could have actually invoked it? Hearns may have actually won a rematch. That's an interesting thing. So if they did business then the way they do it now, it would have been mouth-watering. Leonard would have had to go through with the fight.
Right. Well, all I can say is this.
But tomorrow morning, Frank, you're going back on your word. You said we're starting off with
I was just go.
And there you can't wait. You're so jacked up for this Spence Crawford fight. You're bypassing Inouye and Fulton. Come on. They're the stars. Inouye and Fulton, Frank, are going to be taking place in about 13 hours. That's it.
Yes.
You're going to be in the ring in approximately 13 hours. I mean, let's get that out of the way. Obviously, we have to go heavy on Spence Crawford because it's this Saturday night. And the next time we're going to have a show is the following Monday where we're going to talk about the fight. But you made a comment a little while ago. You said between Spence Crawford and Inouye, they're most people's top 5 pound-for-pound list. You left Fulton out. He's not a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. But if I did a top 10 pound-for-pound list, and I had Stephen Fulton on at 9 or 10, would you blink?
I would.
You would.
I would.
Think you'd merit even a number 10 spot?
I don't. I could come up with 10 guys that I think have a better resume and are as good in the ring as him. It might be hard after 7 or 8, but I don't see him as a top 10 guy yet.
So you're feeling this could be his big breakthrough fight?
This is definitely his breakthrough fight.
Last show, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I said if Fulton dominates Inouye, legitimately dominates him, stops him, you can make a claim for Fulton maybe being number 1 pound for pound. I was just throwing it out there, not actually meaning it, but you were nodding your head, I think, like it had some merit.
No, Jack, even if Fulton wins, if he wins by a first-round knockout, he's the bigger guy. Inouye's moving up. It could just be a bridge too far for Inouye, regarding the weight. But Fulton would definitely be in the top 6 or 7 based off of that. But I don't see any case, regardless of what he does, that the winner of Fulton Inouye leapfrogs the winner of Spence and Crawford.
I don't think the weight difference, saying Fulton is the bigger guy, means too much at all, because bantamweights who are 118 on a regular basis, they would move up to featherweight 126. There wasn't a 122 pound class. If anything, maybe the size difference might favor Inouye in a certain way. Because
if he's been struggling to get down to 118, it may.
No, let me tell you why. Because if you didn't have a 122 pound class, a so-called super bantamweight division, they would have to be fighting for the featherweight title. So Fulton could be even bigger. So maybe this might be working in Inouye's favor in a roundabout.
Well, what I would like to know that what we're not going to know, Jack, is I would like to know what both guys rehydrate to. I mean, could Inouye be 126, 127, and maybe Fulton is a lightweight when he rehydrates? But to me, the interesting thing about this fight, Jack, is this is one of the rare times, but it's happened. So it's not an everyday thing, but it has happened where the smaller guy is actually the puncher. The smaller guy moving up is the puncher, and the bigger guy is actually perceived to be the better boxer, where it's usually the opposite. When guys move up, It's usually the smaller guy is the more gifted guy, the more skilled, and the bigger guy is presumed to be the better puncher. And that's what we have in this fight. So you basically have a Hopkins Trinidad or a Gomez Sanchez in this fight. And I think that's what's so compelling about it.
Well, Gomez against Sanchez. Gomez had substance abuse problems. That wasn't the same Wilfredo Gomez who we knew.
But he was undefeated, and everybody he defeated, he stopped.
Sanchez, you could tell he wasn't there. He really
Jack,
wasn't there.
I think Gomez was the favorite.
But let me tell you what the Nui Fulton makes me think of more style-wise, okay? It's not going to turn out the same way. Tyson and Spinks. Spinks was the better boxer. A Nui fights kind of the way Tyson does. And I know Fulton's not awkward like Spinks, but a similar style. He's going to try to box, move around them, tame a Nui, the way Spinks tried to tame Tyson. But Tyson was quicker than Spinks. Spinks said years later, I wasn't intimidated by Tyson. It was his speed. The guy was faster than I was. And going into their fight, everyone took it for granted. Well, Spinks is the faster guy automatically. They weren't thinking of Tyson's hand speed, how quick he could be. All they were thinking about it was his power. I think it's the same way with a Nui. No one's thinking about his hand speed. He hits faster than Fulton, and he's going to be moving forward. Can Fulton hit and run the whole fight? Fulton's going to have to walk a tightrope, basically. Can Fulton back a Nui up? I don't think he's going to try.
Fulton has to fight, Jack. Fulton has to fight basically a perfect fight. However, again, Bernard Hopkins had to do that against Felix Trinidad. And at the end of the day, what allowed Hopkins to win that fight? He was the better boxer, but he could survive the storm and the Sunday shots of Trinidad, which got him to the late rounds. To me, that is the key to this fight. If Inouye's punches are not game changers, then I think Inouye's going to have some problems because he's never fought someone as big, as long as Fulton, who is as quick, who is slick, who can change their style, who is very good of observing and then adjusting to what's in front of them. So I think that Fulton has a lot of things going for him in this fight. And I know people are saying he's not a puncher. But, I read something the other day, and you have to take it with a grain of salt because they're friends. But Danny Garcia said he held the pads for Fulton. And he said, my hands hurt for 3 days after that. He goes, anybody who thinks that he can't punch is crazy. And Jack, remember this too. If you hit guys clean and they're accurate, that is so much more effective. Why was Tyson, even though Shavers might have been a one-shot bigger puncher, why was Tyson so much more effective? Because he was more accurate, where Shavers would graze, where Tyson would hit you clean, right on the chin. So I think Fulton has some things going for him, Jack. He can adjust. I think he has to survive an early storm, and he can't let Inouye's pace carry him too far where he gets out. He's got to get his respect somewhere along the line. And all I can say is this. This is the best guy that both guys have ever fought. I just think Fulton is going to present more of a distorted picture to the Inouye than the opposite.
I think Fulton's going to give him a good fight. I don't think he's going to come close to winning. I think it's going to go the distance. I think Inouye wins 9 rounds to 3. I think early in the fight, Fulton has problems with Inouye's speed. He's moving forward, and Fulton's going to figure, wow, this guy's hard to figure out because he's so quick with his punches, and I don't want to get hit. And I think Fulton does have a lot of heart, and he's going to, win a round here and there later
Jack,
on.
you just said something, though, that kind of plays into my thought. If Fulton is worried so much about what Inouye is doing, and he's fighting more of a defensive fight and waiting and reacting, he's in trouble. I'm thinking that there's a chance that he feels Inouye shot and he says, you know what? I got lightweights in the gym in Philly punching me. It's harder than that. You know what? I can fight this guy. And I think that's where the fight will be won and lost. I think it's imperative that if Inoue can't throw any game changers and they're stuck with neither guy can really hurt the other guy, and it's going to come down to boxing and moving and adjusting, I think that favors Fulton.
If Fulton can stand up to Inoue for a few rounds, okay, stand there basically, take whatever he throws, hit back, I could see him wearing Inoue out and stopping Inoue late in the fight if he can execute that scenario, which I doubt, because that means he would have to survive Inoue's power for a few rounds, not moving away, basically just fighting on the inside. And I don't really think he can.
All right.
I think it's going to come down to this, Frank. A scenario where Fulton is trying to win, 50% of him is trying to win, 50% of him is trying to survive. And what does that turn out to be? You go the distance, you hope you can win enough rounds to get the decision, but you're not driving forward, plowing forward mentally 100%. And I think Inoue is unfazed. Let me tell you about this fight too. Fulton's getting all the praise this fight is being made for this fight being made, Frank. Wow, he's going to Japan. He's doing this, he's doing that. Well, Fulton had to do it to get a big fight. I compliment Fulton for doing it. It's Inoue who didn't have to take this fight. Inoue is the big star.
Hats off to both of them.
Inoue is the one taking the bigger risk. Inoue has more to lose. If Fulton gets knocked out hypothetically, he could still come back, win a belt, and maybe have a great career. I'm not discounting that. But if Inoue is to get stopped by Fulton or legitimately lose, the shine goes off his star.
I would agree with that. Jack, now you got crazy last week, so don't get crazy this week when I say this. I read and I agree with this, and let me just preface this. I have to full disclosure. I'm rooting for Fulton. He's a Philly guy. And whenever somebody comes along and they just get so much praise and they're perceived as a killer, I have to admit, I kind of try to find a reason to go against that guy. And I'm doing that in this fight. But here's what I was going to say, Jack. I saw Paul Butler, who can't punch, have no offense, and he was only there to survive. And it took Inoue 11 rounds to get him. And it wasn't like he wasn't catching him with hellacious body shots and overhand rights and left hooks to the head throughout that whole fight. I think Fulton would turn Paul Butler inside out. So if Paul Butler, with no corresponding offense, no power, and Inoue knew that he was only fighting to survive, if he can get to the 11th round, I have to think a guy who's a good boxer, who has underrated power, who's a clean puncher, who has a better chin and is physically stronger and won't be intimidated. I got to think he can get to the 10th or 11th round. And if he does, he may be winning the fight.
Frank, Inoue was patient in the fight against Butler. He knew he'd get him out at some point. He wasn't in a rush. What's Roberto Duran's
But he was still banging him all over the ring, Jack.
Roberto Duran's nickname was Hands of Stone. A lot of people consider him to have been a devastating puncher as a lightweight. Okay?
He was.
But fighters like Lou Bizarro went 14 rounds with him. Villamor Fernandez went 13 rounds. Edwin Viruet went to full 15-round distance. These guys were survivors. They moved the way Butler did. They survived. They went rounds. That was similar with Inoue and Butler. Butler was never in the fight against Inoue. He never posed a threat. He didn't look like he was going to win for 1 second of that fight. We all knew it was inevitable that Inoue would get to him, and he did. What does it matter?
But Jack, when you have nothing coming back at you, and Inoue didn't, the fact that it still took him that long tells me, it doesn't say that Inoue can't punch. And it's hard to get a guy who's trying to survive, but this guy offered nothing back. So my point is this. if I can convince myself that Fulton can take what Butler did, and he's more capable of fighting back, and he's bigger and stronger, I just can see the case where he's not in over his head as much as everybody thinks.
No, I won't say he's not in over his head. Stephen Fulton belongs there in this fight, okay? It's not the Inouye show. Stephen Fulton, I give him a chance in this fight. I wouldn't be flabbergasted if he won, okay? I really wouldn't be. I'd just say I'd be surprised if he won. I wouldn't be shocked if he won. I'd be surprised if Stephen Fulton won this fight, because it's nothing to do with Stephen Fulton's abilities as much as I respect Inouye's. I think Inouye is an exceptional talent. That's the difference.
Okay. So you're going to go with Inouye by stoppage?
Inouye by a clear decision, 117-111.
9-3.
117-111. You're going with Fulton on the upset, I guess. Close decision, right?
Yeah, I'm going Jack again.
Pull the trigger on the upset, Frank.
I can't be totally objective on this fight, and I will admit I am looking for reasons to pick Fulton, and I'm just going to ride with Fulton. I don't think he should be 4-1, and I think the fact, and here's another thing too, Inouye has never fought an American black guy who is slick, and we know that's his style, okay? And we saw what Mayweather was capable of doing to guys that brought that aggression, the Mexican style, the aggressive style. He was able to use it against him. I think that Fulton stylistically can do some of the same things that Mayweather did, and I just think, you know what? I'm going to take a shot. I got the bigger guy, the better boxer. I don't think he's intimidated, and maybe it's a bridge too far. As your friend Clifford Roll wrote an article about the bantamweights moving up. I thought it was very good, but they were under 50% moving up. So I'm going to go that maybe this is more Hopkins Trinidad.
I was talking before the show to my friend Don Majeski, who we had on this show. Don's a real old timer, greatest boxing historian in the world, I think, Don Majeski. And there are other great boxing historians. I don't want to start naming names. But in the past, we couldn't see a fight like this. Things are so much better now. Imagine fighting Harada against Etta Joffrey when they fought in Japan. We'd have to wait 3-4 weeks for the Ring Magazine and Boxing Illustrated to come out to find out what happened, and we could see it live. So for everyone who's putting down boxing, it used to be better in the good old days, it's actually better now. We have more access.
The difference is we have to pay for it, though, but yes.
Yeah, but listen, but at least we could get to see the fight. And what a delight it is to see a mega fight on a Tuesday morning.
How cool is that?
United States. I mean, wow.
I mean, think about this. We're talking about a fight that within 12 hours will most likely have been decided. So That's fun. Yeah. I am psyched for this fight. Even though it's been overshadowed by Spence and Crawford, but I'm psyched.
This will be a lead into Spence Crawford. If Inouye wins basically in the fashion I said, 9 rounds to 3, 117-111, how much pressure does that put on the Spence Crawford winner to win clearly? Does Inouye go to number 1 in the pound-for-pound ratings? If, let's say, Crawford ekes out a controversial split decision over Spence, and Inouye wins clearly over Fulton, can you then say Inouye's number 1 pound-for-pound in the world?
I mean, if he's overwhelming and decisive, Jack, you can probably say that. But, I don't make it a habit to agree with Max Kellerman, but Max made a great point where he said that the winner of Spence Crawford has to be number 1 just for the fact that their credentials are unquestioned, and Fulton just does not carry that kind of latitude and that kind of weight to give Inouye all that, even though he's moving up. And again, we don't even know, maybe this helps Inouye. Maybe he's been struggling to make 118. We don't know. But
I tell you, Fulton's profile, if he wins, is going to increase with hardcore boxing fans, but not so much with the general public. Because how many people are going to watch that? The average sports fans going to be tuned into Crawford and Spence.
Jack, you know what's really sad too? And this is another reason why I have trouble with Philadelphia sports. It's getting no juice here. Bernard Hopkins was the middleweight champ for 10 years. All right, he didn't fight here. He got no juice, okay? But the Eagles and the Philly, I mean, the Eagles are already dominating the news coverage because camp's going to be opening soon. There's no juice in Philly for Stephen Fulton. But, Jack, segueing into Crawford and Spence, I'm going to throw something at you, and maybe you saw because I just posted a little while ago. Do you know in title fights, Crawford and Inoue have almost the exact same record? Yeah, Crawford is 17-0 with 14 knockouts. Inoue is 17-0 with 15 knockouts, and they've both done that over the course of 3 weight classes. Yet when you think of them, everybody thinks of Inoue as the destroyer and the monster, and they think of Crawford as the boxer when his knockout record is as impressive as any puncher we've ever seen.
Yeah, no, you make a great point, but keep in mind a few different belts, a few different titles to choose from. So you can't really draw a comparison to, some of the greats in the past. I sometimes think of some of the great fighters of yesteryear. If they had all these sanctioning bodies, all these belts to choose from, what their credentials would have been. I mean, so it's so hard to compare. I mean, it's a great stat. Each guy's 17-0 in title matches. But how do you compare to Joe Louis's record of 25 title defenses, with just one title on the line?
No, but if you win 17 title fights and 14 by knockouts, you're pretty good. Or 15 by knockout. I mean, Mayweather is what? He's 27-0 in title fights with 10 knockouts. I think that's his record around there.
You always have to go after Mayweather, Frank, but this time you're complimenting him like a little bit. You asked me to before the show. I'm sure you were going to get to this in a second. You're looking more to the Spence Crawford fight, looking more forward to it than any fight you've looked forward to for a while. To me, though, there was one welterweight fight that I actually looked more forward to than this one, and that's the Trinidad De La Hoya fight. Slightly more, believe it or not.
Really?
I think Felix and Oscar were in their primes. Like Spence and Crawford, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say both guys in their prime. But Felix and Oscar, it's easy to forget their credentials. Both guys were unbeaten as well. Both guys were big stars in the sport.
De La Hoya was 31-0 and Trinidad was 35-0.
Yeah, and it was a lot of intrigue, what was going to happen in that fight. It was so unpredictable. Would Trinidad's chin hold up, to De La Hoya? Rival promoters, Don King with Trinidad, Bob Arum with Oscar. So you had that little feud brewing as well. You had that little subplot behind the scenes. And Oscar was the golden boy. He'd won a couple of fights by decision where some people maybe disputed it a little. The Pernell Whitaker fight, which I actually thought he won. I was in Vegas for that fight. And, and there were a couple other fights like Iquarte, which they questioned whether he deserved the decision. And then you have Trinidad, like I said, Trinidad, major star. And what a fight that was. I was so looking forward to it. And did it live up to expectations? Not the action itself. The action in the ring was, was kind of drab, very average at most. But it was a close, controversial fight.
Jack, I thought of that, and I'm going to tell you why this surpasses that to me. I think that Spence and Crawford are more credentialed than De La Hoya and Trinidad were at that fight. Neither of them have come close to losing. And the other thing, and it's not fair, but since we look back at the Trinidad De La Hoya fight and it's behind us, and the fight was kind of a letdown because if you think about it, yeah, it was a controversial decision, but not on my card. De La Hoya won, but what do you come away thinking about that fight? De La Hoya couldn't finish, and Trinidad, even when De La Hoya tried to run the clock out, still couldn't beat him up that much. So I think both guys came out of that fight with a dinged reputation. So
Trinidad got the decision. You feel Oscar won, but Trinidad got
the decision, right. But there's no doubt in my mind Oscar won the fight. But forget the decision. I think, Jack, they both came out looking a little lesser. As I said, De La Hoya came out looking as a guy that couldn't or wouldn't finish. And Trinidad, even when Oscar was running and clearly trying to run the clock out, he still didn't really beat him up that much and only won the rounds on aggression. So I think that taints how I look back at that. Where this fight, I'm not going to say it's Ali Frazier, but I do admit, I will say this. I do have a hard time picturing either guy losing. It's just a little easier for me to see Spence losing than it is Crawford.
Well, who has more upside, Spence or Crawford? If I say to you, Frank, one of the two is going to go on to be one of the top 5 fighters, pound for pound of all time. Let's say I say that. They're going to go on a big run. Who has more greatness in them?
Crawford.
Peak value.
Crawford.
And that's the reason I'm picking Crawford to win. Spence, I think, is technically better. Spence is a terrific fighter. But I just think Crawford has more upside. I think if Spence is to win, he's got to get off to a good start, which he very well might. I think Spencer's going to win 4 of the first 5 rounds. How's that for prediction? When Crawford's then going to start coming on, and I really think it's going to be a terrific second half of the fight. I mean, it's going to be a fight to remember. We're going to want to see them do it again after the first fight. We're going to want to see the rematch.
Based on your question about who has the bigger upside, the best way I can answer this, and I may look like a fool next week with what I'm about to say. However, I can very much see a scenario where the day comes where I consider Terence Crawford one of the all-time greats. I'm not sure, even if he wins, if I feel that way about Spence. The other thing I like about this fight, and I compare it to Leonard Hearns as far as the mindset and a little bit the styles, where the boxer may become the puncher and the puncher may become the boxer. But, Jack, I also think everybody's talking about, well, they're a little old, 33 and 35. But I think one thing that everyone has missed as there's a great chance, and I think this applies to Crawford a little bit more, but I'm not going to say exclusively. Jack, Terence Crawford has never had to dig down and reach back for all he had the way Sugar Ray Leonard did against Tommy Hearns. So I think there's a chance because of Spence, his aggression, what the fight means to Crawford, and Spence's activity. I think there's a chance that Spence may bring out the best in Crawford. But that could also apply to Crawford bringing the best out of Spence. But the difference is, I just think, and again, I could eat these words in 7 days. When I see Terence Crawford, Jack, I see a fighter that has that intangible like Sugar Ray Leonard had. I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to win and I'm not letting you beat me. And sort of the way Michael Jordan had it on the basketball court. I just think Terence Crawford has that gene. And I think what's going to be the case is I think both guys are going to have to escalate their game a couple times during the fight. But like it was with Leonard Hearns, the guy that has one more gear after they both emptied the wagon, the guy that can go one more gear is going to win the fight.
I think that's going to be Crawford. I'm picking him to stop Spence all the way at the end of the fight. I'm going to be bold with a prediction and say he's going to stop Spence inside of 1 minute left in the fight in a terrific slugfest, because I think it's going to get to the point where Spence is going to be exchanging with him in rounds 10, 11, 12, because he won't have much choice. There'll be nowhere to go. once Crawford gets a full head of steam after being a bit methodical the first half of the fight, like he's been known to do, Crawford's a slow starter. I mean, look at his fights. He never really fights till he has to.
He's never had to, Jack, but this time I think he realizes he may have to.
Yeah, well, the great fighters, they respond when they have to, according to what the opponent puts out. Look, I've seen Crawford fight from ringside a lot of times. I remember another Philadelphian, Hank Lundy, okay? Hank Lundy fought Crawford in New York, and he fought him pretty evenly until Crawford stopped him in the 6th round because Lundy was bringing it. And Crawford responded. Lundy was staying with him, but you know it's inevitable. You could stay with Terence Crawford for a while, but eventually he's going to wear you down. I like to compare it to marathon runners. The elite marathon runners, you could stay with them till the halfway point, but then they have an extra gear and they're going to drop you. And Crawford just drops opponents literally and figuratively.
So what you just said is basically Earl Spence is going to force Terence Crawford to fight, and that is ultimately going to be his undoing.
I think in the later stages of the fight, it's going to be vice versa. Crawford's going to be forcing Spence to fight because I don't think Spence in the later rounds, 10, 11, 12, is going to be able to execute a plan to just box and move. Because I think once Crawford gets it going, there'll be nowhere to go for Spence, basically, but to exchange for him very late in the fight. I don't know, have you noticed this, Frank, in the All Access episodes? Maybe I'm imagining it. Spence doesn't look like he has that bounce to him. I was thinking of the accidents he was in, the out-of-the-ring activity, out-of-the-ring troubles he's had. His body's taken a beating. I get the feeling, he's not like, he doesn't look like a young guy to me anymore.
I have to admit, Jack, I've only seen 2 of the All Access. I missed the 3rd one. I will say this. I don't see quite that, what you're saying, but I'll tell you what I will say. And you had a guest on the other night or yesterday, I believe, with Mac, and I totally agree. The All Access is definitely tilted towards Spence, and it seems it's all about Spence. I clearly saw that when Abraham said that.
Abraham enlightened me when he came on the show because I thought there was not going to be any favoritism out in Las Vegas. Okay, no one has an edge. This isn't in Dallas, Errol Spence's hometown, where they talked about putting on the fight in the beginning, and it wound up in Vegas, that both guys get a fair shot. But, according to Abraham, he pointed out some good things. The PBC is Spence's promoter. I didn't really notice Spence is getting a lot more activity on All Access. I didn't pick up
I sensed it, Jack, that this is more about Spence than Crawford.
But I could tell you something also, personality-wise. Crawford is more like an Aaron Rodgers type. I could see him shutting the doors to his gym for All Access. Okay, I'll give you an interview. I'll give you just enough. You could go and give Errol more. I don't care. That's the feeling I get. I think Errol Spence is more sensitive to getting that extra attention.
I can agree with that. Jack, think about this.
He doesn't give a darn.
Well, he's focused, Jack.
It's his career. No, Frank. He held out for this fight with nothing on the horizon.
Right.
He's been holding out forever. He's the closest thing to Sugar Ray Robinson in negotiations. He's
Jack, think about this. Crawford has said that he knows that that a victory in this fight will silence everybody who has questioned his opposition, questions his chin, questions a lot of things about him. And it's almost like he has that Joe Frazier mentality going into the first fight with Ali, that I am just going to prove to the world that I'm the man and there's only one thing left for me to do. I have to beat this guy. And I sense that with Crawford, that he senses the magnitude of the event. And think about this, Jack. If he wins, he'll be the first 4-belt holder in 2 weight classes. His credentials are really starting to pile up. I think he knows all that on the line, and it's so hard to pick against him in this fight. I'm not going to do it. I just see a meanness in him. I see the guy. He's definitely the best adjuster in the game, where he sees something and he finds a weakness. He makes the opponent fight from that the rest of the fight. So to me, with Crawford, he has to do one thing in this fight. He has to take away Spence's jab. And to do that, there's only a couple ways to do it. You counter it, you jab with them, or you smother it. I think Crawford's the type guy that will try to counter it and smother it later in the fight. But that is the key to the fight, Jack. If Spence's jab is not pushing Crawford back and setting him up to go to the body, or he's getting painted coming in, he's going to be in trouble.
I agree completely. Let me throw something at you, Frank, whether this is revealing or not. To me, it's a teeny bit revealing. You might say it's utter nonsense, ignore it. Who you spar with has something to do with the mental makeup of a fighter. Case in point, Crawford's close buddy who he's mentoring is Shakur Stevenson. Shakur's been one of his sparring partners. This is Shakur Stevenson, a great fighter, a top 10 pound for pound guy as far as I'm concerned. If you're not a great fighter yourself, you're not going to want to be in with Shakur. You're not going to want to look bad. He's so confident. And according to Shakur, Terence Crawford's the best fighter in the world, point blank. This is Shakur Stevenson talking, okay? And also, at the end of Mayweather's career, we know the way Mayweather cherry-picked his spots. He used Errol Spence as a sparring partner. Not as a traditional sparring partner, but he brought him into camp and they sparred a lot. And the idea that Mayweather would feel comfortable being in with an Errol Spence maybe tells me he could do, maybe Spence wasn't that great, because it's hard to envision Mayweather bringing in anyone who you could outdo him, even, in camp.
And that's kind of where Spence made his name, too, sparring Mayweather, because he did so good.
Yeah, but we know fighters would fight him. I don't think Spence made his name that way. He made his name.
I'm saying, but that's what got people looking to Spence, I should say, and paying attention to him.
Well, same with Timmy Bradley, Terence Crawford. Timmy Bradley said when Terence Crawford was a sparring partner, they had no idea who he was. And he said Crawford took him to school. And then he
the first time they sparred, right.
And he said, "You're not a normal sparring partner. Who are you?" No, that was great.
Based on, and this is just how I interpret it, based on Crawford putting a lot of rounds in with Shakur Stevenson, you know what that tells me, Jack? That tells me that Crawford believes I don't have to worry about anything physically with Spence. I have to be sharp, because Shakur, he really is nothing like Earl Spence. So that tells me that Crawford feels I'm good there. I got to be sharp. And that's the only thing I can read from that, other than being in with another great guy who maybe one day may be fighting for the welterweight title.
Who has a more difficult style to sell, Shakur Stevenson or Errol Spence? I know different weight classes. One guy's a lightweight, one guy's a welterweight. But who has?
That's not even close. Shakur Stevenson. He's a much more distorted picture, Jack, because he can do so many things.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure, and they're close on a personal level, Shakur and Terence Crawford. And I'm sure Shakur Stevenson has imitated Errol Spence to the T. But so Crawford that's the best possible sparring partner you could have in there. He's not a big guy, but he's so ultra talented, Shakur Stevenson. So you solved the riddle of Shakur Stevenson imitating Errol Spence. I mean, it doesn't.
See, I see it a little differently, Jack. I see it's more of a sharpness thing where iron sharpens iron, but I don't think that Shakur would be a good guy to imitate or emulate Spence. I think Crawford looks at Spence and says, "Okay, here's the deal. This guy, I don't want to say he's not sophisticated because he's fundamentally sound, but Spence does one thing, Jack. He carries the fight. How does he do that? he carries it behind his jab. So if I'm Crawford, I'm saying, okay, he's going to try to beat my body, and he's going to try to dictate with the jab. I have to take the jab away. I'm not worried about his body shots because he'll pay a price if he tries to go to my body. So I think with Shakur, I think it's all about timing, crispness, and speed.
You know what I think? I'm thinking, Frank, of the fallout after the fight. What's going to be after Saturday night? The loser has 30 days to invoke a rematch clause. I think the loser invokes it no matter what because of financial considerations. They're not going to get that type of payday anywhere else. So it's in their best interest financially to invoke the rematch clause, the loser. Okay? And what excuses can the loser make in this fight? If it's Errol Spence, he could talk about inactivity, this and that. You know, he was in the accident, the whole bit. What excuse could Terence Crawford have that could look, you know, halfway viable?
I guess it depends on how he loses, Jack. If he loses the decision, he doesn't have many excuses. But if he gets caught with a big shot and is stopped, he could say, you know, he caught me. It's boxing. It happens.
Let me ask, okay, speaking of that, if he caught me, if its fight's going to end within 5 rounds, you make Crawford a heavy favorite. If someone told you right now it ended within five rounds, what would pop in?
I would say Crawford. If you said, Frank, I'm not going to tell you who won. I'm going to tell you the result without telling me the winner who won. If you called me up and said, Frank, the fight ended in the 5th round, I would say Crawford caught him coming in and stopped him.
Okay. If I said to you, Frank, the fight ended in the 11th round, 10th round, 11th round, are you more like 50-50 who may have
yes.
been or close to 50-50? So can you see a scenario where Spence stops Crawford? Logically, not me just throwing out any scenario. We both know the type of puncher Crawford is. We could see Crawford nailing Spence and maybe stopping him at some point, probably later in the fight if it happens. But can you see Spence's power being enough to be a difference making the fight? Not
after he grinds him down and beats him down, yes.
No, but
I don't think he does do a one punch out of nowhere. I think he has to beat him down.
Okay, but Crawford's power could conceivably play a role at any point in the fight from round 1 on. But Spence,
he's the more explosive puncher.
Right. Okay, that's the point I'm getting at. Now the chins, no one talks about that. There's no evidence that either guy can't take a good punch, but neither guy.
I've seen both guys hurt, but never in trouble.
Yeah, Crawford was nailed. Against the European fight, I forgot.
Mean Machine buzzed him for a second, and so did Gamboa.
They called it a slip, but the Gamboa thing was no big deal to me. But the Mean Machine there, I was at the Garden for that fight, and it was called a slip. It was a knockdown. He buzzed Crawford, but you know, Crawford was fighting in close. That was one of the rare times where Crawford was exchanging early in the fight, was showing a little urgency for whatever reason and got caught. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the fighter's chin. Every fighter gets buzzed just about at one point or another.
I have one for you. Who's the harder puncher?
Oh, Crawford. More explosive. He's a harder puncher than Spence.
Okay. Here's how I look at them as far as punching power. I think if they threw 10 punches each, 7 of Spence's would be a little heavier and harder. But I think that Crawford's 3 good shots would overwhelm the best that Spence had. So I think that throughout the round, on a punch-by-punch basis, Spence may be a little bit the heavier-handed guy, but Crawford is capable of landing those game changers, those 2 or 3 shots that's it and he doesn't recover.
Well, it's like Ali and Frazier. I mean, Ali would hit him maybe more quality shots, but one left hook from Joe outdid, you know? A few of those.
Yeah, where I think Crawford shots, like I don't think Ali landed any harder shots than Frazier, where I think Crawford throughout the round could maybe Spence landed 7 of the hardest shots, but Crawford's 3 did more damage than any of the ones Spence landed.
Frank, well, if we have time, we could get back to Crawford and Spence, but I want to cover these next 2 topics quickly. There was a fight Saturday night. George Kambosos fought Maxi Hughes. George Kambosos, former world lightweight champion, who upset Teofimo Lopez, major upset in New York, and then lost his title to Devin Haney, and then lost in a rematch to Devin Haney, both in Australia. He fights Maxi Hughes in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Man, when does Oklahoma get a fight of any type of magnitude? But it's on ESPN. I was covering it off TV for Boxing News. I had Maxi Hughes winning 8 rounds to 4. Most people have Maxi Hughes winning. Mark Kriegel, ESPN, had it 9 rounds to 3 for Maxi Hughes. And if you just Google the reports, I mean, just virtually everyone's saying it was a bad decision. So it winds up being a majority decision for Kambosos. One judge has it even. When I say I can live with it, I think that's a lousy decision, but it doesn't strike me as outrageous. It just strikes me as very bad to call it a draw. But then the other judge has a 115, 113 for Kambosos. And then this other judge has it 117, 111. And my beef is this, Frank. I'm tired of venting about bad decisions. We all vent about it all the time. The people in power should do something about it. If ESPN keeps complaining about these bad decisions, Timmy Bradley and all of them, I'd like to see ESPN do this. Say, we're not going back to Oklahoma in the foreseeable future. Not that Oklahoma is going to get a big fight. In just about all these locations that turn out an outrageous decision, they decide they're not going there. You better believe the state commissions are going to shape up because they're going to hear from their governor what the heck is going on. And we're going to get rid of these inept judges, or these judges are going to straighten out and perform better.
I think if they clean up Oklahoma, Jack, it does nothing. They got to clean up New York and Vegas. If they threaten not to go to Oklahoma, nobody will care because, like you just said, there's no fights there. I fell asleep before the fight. I didn't see it live. I went back and watched it. I think 8-4, 9-3 is a score. I think it was a terrible decision.
8 rounds to 4 for you.
Nobody is going to do anything about it, Jack. As Timothy Bradley said, and it's funny because he was a beneficiary in one of those decisions against Pacquiao. But like he said, we can't talk to the referees. There's no oversight. And Jack, in a week, this will be old news and it'll happen again. And all we can do is hope that it doesn't happen again. It's not going to change, but you can see why people have a bad taste in their mouth about the sport and think things are a little bit underhanded. And the only thing I can say is, why did Kambosos get the decision, a fight that he lost? The only thing I can say is this. He still has one of the best wins in the sport by beating Lopez, and I guess they think that they can still trade off his name by doing that, where Maxi Hughes doesn't bring much to the table. But it's a shame because, as Bradley said, they put so much into it to get into that spot, and then to have it taken away, it's deplorable.
Yeah, I don't know with the judges with any motives. Maybe it was a completely honest assessment, and maybe they just did an inept job, a miserable job of judging.
Well, let me ask you this, Jack. We see a lot of bad decisions, more than we should. Now, it comes down to one of two things. Either the judges aren't qualified and they're the wrong people judging the fights, or they're corrupt. It's one of the two. How do we fix it?
Well, I'm going to say this. The promoter Top Rank, they could put pressure on the commission. The PBC could, Matchroom Boxing can. They could put a lot of pressure on the commission as well for fair decisions to be handed out. But Top Rank was probably relieved Kambosos got the decision. They were probably happy because think of what they could do with Kambosos. They just signed him. They could either match him with Lomachenko if a Shakur Stevenson match with Lomachenko doesn't take place. Lomachenko against Kambosos, if that's the road Lomachenko wants to go. or they could do a rematch, Teofimo Lopez against Kambosos now. But if it's Maxi Hughes, how much do we care about Maxi?
And that's a good point. So it's all about money.
Right.
It's all about setting up the next fight.
It was the other way around. And Kambosos had legitimately won the fight, and they gave it to Maxi Hughes. You would have heard probably Bob Arum, Top Rank, complaining.
Oh, he'd be having press conferences all over the place.
Back to Oklahoma again. This is corrupt. This is this. This is that. But that's boxing. Oh, Frank, the next couple of nights on HBO. HBO actually is silently, just for the next couple of nights, getting back in the boxing business, doing a documentary on Oscar De La Hoya, Golden Boy, with De La Hoya reportedly bears his soul, and we learn about him, all the, skeletons in his closet and the whole thing. What's been your impression of De La Hoya, his legacy and all, as a fighter?
Jack, I have a ton of respect for Oscar as a fighter. He fought everybody. He didn't duck anybody. And really, nobody until Hopkins and then Pacquiao 4 years later really beat him up. So I think Oscar is an outstanding, borderline, great fighter. Tough. My issue with him was whenever he fought elite guys, other than Fernando Vargas, he really never shined or separated himself. And that's the difference between him and Sugar Ray Leonard. Like him as a fighter, ton of respect. I'm not crazy about him post his career. I'll just let it go with that.
You make a good point with Oscar De La Hoya, the big fights in his career. Forget the Pacquiao fight. He was finished the end of his career. Let's forget that fight took place, okay? But think of all the big names he fought. He never separated himself to really show superiority over them, and they didn't really show superiority over him in reality. But think of all the fighters: Shane Mosley,
undefeated,
Iquade, Felix Trinidad. Even against Hopkins, he was ahead on one card. He was competitive in that fight, and then he got
Vargas,
Floyd Mayweather. Think of it: Oscar was past his peak when he fought Mayweather, and he fought him to a close decision loss, which leads me to believe Oscar at his very best. You put him against Floyd Mayweather, best of 5. Floyd wins 3, Oscar wins 2. That's what I think.
I say 3-2 Oscar.
I could see that happening. Especially if it's a time where Oscar's the golden boy with all that pull in a close decision. But
think about it. Oscar was the last guy that fought Mayweather that actually drew the bigger check.
Right. Let me ask, now that we're on Oscar, we mentioned his fight with Trinidad before. Any chance, Frank, the Spence Crawford fight turns out to be a dud like Oscar and Trinidad? And if it does, are you going to come on here and say, I knew I shouldn't have spent my money for the pay-per-view?
No, Jack, because the excitement, the lead up to it, how keyed up I'll be about it this week. No, I don't care about that. But I will just say this. I can't see this being Trinidad De La Hoya or Mayweather Pacquiao. I think this is either Duran Leonard or Hearns Leonard. I just can't see a scenario, Jack, and that's because of the mindset of both guys. They're both sharks. They're both killers. One guy's going to bring it to the other guy, and that's going to be Spence is going to bring it to Crawford, and it's okay. Crawford, how are you going to adjust? You're going to be Mr. Boxer, Mr. Puncher, Mr. Counter Puncher, but you're going to fight. And I just think that there's no way it can be a bad fight.
Let's get this comment. Paul Merrick, speaking of what you just said, do you think Fulton can get a decision of Japan has to knock him out? I think Fulton can get a decision there. I think
Jack, we don't usually see bad decisions in Japan. Did you ever think about that? We never see any bad decisions in Japan. They usually get it right. So based on that, I'm going to say he will get a fair shake in Japan. If he wins, I don't think they'll steal it from him.
Okay, but I think it'll go the distance. I think Inouye wins clearly, so I don't think it's really controversial. But Frank,
so Jack, basically, you like both favorites to win the two big fights.
I like Crawford to stop Spence in the last minute of the fight. a barn burner, sensational fight, all-time.
Better
great
chance. Better chance to win, Fulton or Spence. If I told you there was an upset in the two fights, Spence has a better chance to win.
Better chance of beating Crawford than Fulton has of beating Inouye.
Interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but it's just a thought I was thinking about. I can't wait, Jack. This is a great weekend for boxing, and in 12 hours, we'll know. Thanks for watching, everybody. We will see you next week and talk about what we got right, what we got wrong, and the results of the fights. Good night.
Good night.